Hi everyone, Jake Silverbrooks here. Before we get started, in case you don't make it to the end, the ancillary review of books and A Meal of Thorns are free and ad-free, and we plan to keep them that way. We'd really appreciate your support. Go to patreon.org/ancillary review to become a supporter, which will also get you access to our Discord and monthly newsletter. Okay, on to the episode. A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse, he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Welcome to Meal of Thorns, a critical book club where we look at thorny, interesting works. We talk to writers, critics, reviewers, scholars. Today we are joined by A.V. Marraccini, a critic, essayist, and historian of art. She is the critic in residence at the Department of Interdisciplinary Media, NYU Tandon. Her writing has appeared all kinds of great places, including the Los Angeles Review of Books, the New York Review of Architecture, the Times Literary Supplement, and the incredibly rad Cleveland Review of Books. Her astonishing book of criticism, theory, and memoir, We the Parasites, was published by Sublunary Editions and Boiler House last year, and you, dear listener, should pick that up. A.V., thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So today we are going to talk about Olga Rabin's book, The Employees. But before we dive into that, I wanted to know, what else have you been reading? What else have you been thinking about, working on? What are you excited about?
So I've been rereading actually Nabokov's Ada, which I say, or Ada, as you might say, or Arter, A Family Chronicle,
Okay.
because I found a wonderful early edition that was like the Book of the Month Club edition.
Hmm.
So it was a first, but quite an affordable, like $25 first at
Okay.
Unnameable Books here in Brooklyn. It's a fun mid-century cover, very striking design.
Nice.
And I've been really enjoying immersing myself back in his use of language.
Hmm.
And I'm also looking forward to Anton Her's new book. He's an excellent Korean translator, and I know you've reviewed it, and I haven't seen it yet. So
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that as
Yeah.
well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, Toward Eternity is really good. I was really fascinated to read it just because I didn't know that her was also writing fiction to that length. And it's really good. It's really interesting. It's got a lot of interesting resonances with this book actually, but we'll hold that off. Anything else you're working on, excited about, want to share?
Yeah, so this summer I'm using my sort of non-semester time as an academic to work on my second book, These New Fragilities,
Hmm.
which is a book about the nature of art and technology and lateness in a world of atrocity and ruin and how we sort of cope with living with those things in tandem. And I'm pleased to announce, I think for the first time on a podcast and for the first time generally, that it'll be published by Seven Stories Press here in New York. And so it's wonderful to share a press with, Octavia Butler, Noam
Yeah.
Chomsky, Angela Davis. So I'm really thrilled and excited about that. And I'll be doing less freelance work, I think, during the course of the next couple of years
Mm.
as I work on the book, but I will be doing a freelance piece in the fall for the Berlin Review on Monet and Rhetorics of Difficulty and Rilke's French poems as well.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. That's very cool. Would you say the name of the forthcoming title again?
It's
Just like-
These New Fragilities. At least it is for now.
For now,
Well,
okay.
I'm pretty sure I usually name my books. I mean, We the Parasites was named within the first 10,000
Mm.
words. So, I think that's probably going to stick as the title.
Oh,
And it uses stuff as diverse as sort of Japanese hand poetry, Rococo French painting, Japanese post-war architecture,
mm-hmm.
and at the same time, Agnes Martin, Lenore Tawney, Eva Hess, and then Rilke, but also there's a reference to Neuromancer. There's a lot about Said. So I
Okay.
think that it draws broadly on the tradition of speculative fiction as radical imagination. Although you wouldn't always see an essayist or an essay as a form that does that. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, my book, which is one long essay,
Mm-hmm.
um, really does.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very exciting. And that's a great segue into talking about our main topic today. So today we are discussing The Employees by Olga Ravin. It was originally published in Danish in 2020. It's been translated by Martin Aitken for English editions from Lolly and New Directions Press. It was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, and this is a really fascinating book. It's a very slender little book. It's set in the 22nd century aboard this ship called the 6000 ship. It follows these humans, and eventually we figure out humanoids, which it's not totally clear, but some kind of android cyborg thing, as they go to this planet New Discovery where they find strange objects that have some kind of deep impact on them. The whole book is given to us as a bunch of contextless interviews with they just have numbers. They're not completely in order. We have no names of the subjects. We don't hear the interviewers' questions. And it's a very strange, kind of haunting, kind of unsettling approach. It it was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, but it didn't get a ton of attention in genre spaces, which still kind of breaks me up, which is why I was so happy that you wanted to talk about it.
Well, I think it's one of those books that, I mean, it was eminently literary, right? I read it
Hmm.
as a literary meditation on objecthood just as much as I did as science fiction. And unfortunately, genre spaces are becoming more and more exclusive to literary titles.
Hmm.
Recently, they're not, Nana Adije Brenya's recent title wasn't considered for a lot of science fiction
Hmm.
prizes, speculative fiction prizes, which it should have been. And I
Hmm.
think genre is starting to exclude literary titles on purpose, which it will only harm them in the long run. And I think there's quite a defensive maneuver. And I'm sorry if they're intimidated by the quality of Ravin's
Hmm.
prose, but I find it to be beautiful. And that's one of the reasons I became interested in the book. I mean, I am interested in speculative fiction as genre, but the quality of the prose is the first thing that strikes me about this book. And I should say, I'm currently holding the Lolly edition of the book.
Hmm.
Lolly is based in the Barbican, and they're an English language publisher of Scandinavian fiction. They're British, so some of their titles make it here. Sometimes they're picked up, as this one was, by New Directions, an
Hmm.
excellent publisher of writing and translation in the US. But Lolly also publishes much less known Scandinavian authors and lots of speculative fiction, which is a popular genre in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway right now.
Hmm.
So I recommend to our listeners that they check out Lolly. And Lolly's
Cool.
design for the employees to me is the better of the two
Oh my
covers.
gosh, yeah. I have the new
Yeah,
edition,
which is, I mean, the
which
New
is
Directions
it's
it's
or
a
New Directions,
beautiful
yeah.
cover, but Lolly takes a lot of risks. And I
Yeah.
think if they hadn't published this book, New Directions wouldn't have picked it up. So it's awesome
Mm-hmm.
to see. I mean, they publish runs of like 300, 200, copies of some Scandinavian title. And then, if it makes it, then a bigger press picks it up. And these are the people taking the risks. So I would
Hmm.
say you can order directly from Lolly internationally. I do a
Oh,
bunch of
nice.
times a year, and they don't publish that many titles, so I get a big bunch of them. Another title I bought from them is translated from the Finnish by Christina Karlsson.
Hmm.
And it's about a 12th century Tang Dynasty eunuch. So they have
Hmm.
this incredibly broad range of really great New Scandinavian literature.
Cool.
Because I always like to support New Directions as well, an
Hmm.
independent house. The big five conglomerates tend to publish, Nebula and Hugo type titles,
Hmm.
but the literary speculative fiction that I've most enjoyed recently has come from independent houses.
Yeah, New Directions is putting out so much good stuff in this kind of like I don't want to say like post label, but not worrying a ton about genre and just doing a lot of interesting, fascinating kind of
They
stuff.
have another new upcoming Danish title that I just got the galley of. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Also for listeners, just these covers we're talking about. The New Directions is great. It's got this like freaky water cooler kind of art piece that's leaking black ink. But the Lolly edition every time I see it, I want to like scrape it off. It's like an all black cover with this kind of orange square on it. Um,
And it has orange end papers, and they
yeah.
repeat the printing of the black square on the frontispiece. It
Mm,
really gives the book's sense of objecthood, a place,
uh-huh.
and time. And Lolly generally has really excellent cover design. Whoever does the cover design for Lolly, oh my God, let me take you for a drink. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I encourage readers to Google these covers, especially if they've
Mm-hmm.
read the book, because it's a really interesting study in contrasts. I
Yeah.
love cover design as a discipline, and sci-fi is often the victim of really bad cover design.
Mm. And I feel like it's gone from being like bad in a fun way to just bad in a kind of boring way. Like, like give me like some ludicrous bad covers at least. Yeah.
The minimalist Delaney's were good at the
Mm.
time because they were otherwise getting schlocky,
Hmm.
And I mean, there is fun schlocky illustration. Like I recently rebought a bunch of 80s and 90s Bradburys that
Oh,
have
cool.
really psychedelic
Hmm.
covers, right? And I love that kind of thing sometimes. But for something like this, I think it's really important for the sense of the book and the literary imprimatur to have a cover that is high design because it's about objecthood.
Yeah. I'm just talking about cover design. I just got in an arc of Jeff Vandermeer's forthcoming book, which is from FSG, and all the FSG covers just kind of like blow all the other like kind of standard spec fic covers out of the water. They're just so well designed. So
I mean,
yeah,
FSG is only acquiring SpecFic to help their bottom line. Let's be very
yeah.
clear.
But
And
I'm
Vandermeer's work is quite popular, but I'm
yeah.
very happy about this development because it means more literary publishers will be interested in SpecFic. I like Vandermeer's work
Hmm.
some of his earlier work. It doesn't strike me as being of quite the literary quality that Raven's work is,
Mm,
or
yeah.
that Jenny Vall's work is. There are a lot of women Scandinavian writers taking risks that
Mm,
frankly, FSG does not have the balls for right now.
mm,
So, think props to New Directions and props to
yeah.
Lolly for taking the risk on this book because you're seeing the prizes too get
Hmm.
nominated by indie presses, which FSG is, and so is Norton. But even smaller ones, recently there's been a lot of talk about Fitzgeraldo has every Nobel winner,
Yeah,
right?
right.
You know, and Seven Stories has Octavia Butler and Annie Ernaux, and there's the sense that Big Five imprints no longer take risks.
Hmm.
Chain Gang All Stars was actually an exception at
Yeah.
Knopf, but since the publishing industry has decided to fire all the Black people they hired in the wake of George Floyd,
Yeah.
we're no longer going to see interesting Afrofuturism come out of those houses as well.
Yeah. It's really kind of devastating to think about what the next X number of years are going to look like until we kind of build back from that. Like, oh,
I mean, I don't see a build back, right? I mean, I
mm,
kind of see all those people going to indie houses or not
yeah.
being published, which is horrible. Frankly, hybrid forms
Mm,
are really interesting to me as a reader, and
hmm.
those are often existing more in translations because English publishers don't take risks on them. And so
Hmm.
more and more, I've noticed in my own buying habits that I'm just buying titles from independent presses I mean, the proportion has flipped hugely. And so I'm now almost exclusively buying editions of speculative fiction from independent presses. And I mean, this will differ with like things like reissues of Luke Wynn or whatever.
Hmm. Right.
But I think until big presses recommit to taking risks
Mm,
and to representing people, I mean, Delany should have a MacArthur. He should have a Nobel.
hmm.
Kensu
Oh
should
yeah.
have a Nobel.
Yeah.
Like,
It's kind of offensive that Delaney doesn't. Like,
I mean, he's a black man who writes about power and
hmm.
slavery and very explicit sex, and there's no way that half of that stuff would get
Hmm.
published
Yeah.
today. I I mean the way that I see mainstream publishing going, it's going to be 20 years before they are able to publish anyone like a Delany again.
Yeah.
And if they don't give that man a MacArthur before soon, I will be extremely
Mm.
grieved.
Yeah, a lot of my hope within speculative fiction is like how vibrant the like really small press and indie press scene is right now. There's just so many little houses putting out great stuff. And I do have like a little ray of hope that a few of the big places still seem to have at least departments that are able to gamble, like Tor, who's kind of they're kind of the elephant in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
room.
normal, right?
Yeah, but they publish things like like Vajra Chandrasekera's The Santa Bright Doors, which is sweeping the awards right now, and I think is
And I
really
think Gretchen Felker Martin
yeah. Yep.
the mainstream press. One
Hmm.
of the things I've been enjoying, I've been reading a lot of sort of architecturally based, uncategorizable,
Uh,
probably speculative fiction by Inside the Castle and John Treffry, and they're a Kansas-based press, just
okay.
tiny, tiny
Huh.
on demand. So I think there's a lot of really great stuff out there. I think it's just they're smaller imprints and smaller presses that are publishing it. I also think a lot of really good work is coming in translation, which
Hmm.
in terms of the American market, fiction and translation gets screwed.
Hmm.
So often I end up at least importing British editions because it's more likely to get
Mm.
published there. And even there, things are bad. So,
Yeah,
I mean, Americans notoriously don't read translated fiction. So.
right. But but we are today.
But we are today. And
Yeah.
I mean, Ravin, I should say, has published another book called My Work, which is radically different, although in
Mhm,
some ways not. Also about bodies and alienation in some of the same
mhm,
ways. About her experience of motherhood and childbirth in some ways, but is also fictionalized, and then also is out from New Directions more recently here in the US.
mhm. So tell me about this. This is such a broad question. I hate asking it. Tell me about objecthood and the employees, because it's the thing that jumps out at me. It's the thing that like grabbed me when I was first reading it. What are your
So
sort of broad thoughts?
As,
And
as
we
you've
should,
mentioned, yeah, we should probably explain for listeners who haven't read the book, and there will be spoilers. So if
mhm.
you don't, I
Such
mean,
as they are. Yeah.
to the extent that you can spoil conceptual literary fiction. Um, so part of the plot of the book is that the characters you come to realize through these interviews have found and brought aboard their ship these objects from a terrestrial planet like space. And the objects, what they sound most like is this kind of conceptual sculpture that the author thanks a sculptor in her introduction. If you go look at the sculptures, they actually do sort of look like what I imagine the objects in the book to be, but they mention hides, they mention smell, they mention texture. Actually, sight is something that she privileges almost last.
Hmm.
And the descriptions of appearance are variable because, of course, we're seeing them through all these different voices. And the objects get nicknames from the crew, and they almost have a personhood, right? And the entire book does pivot around this question of the humans, the humanoids, who is a person? What is it to be a person? How much of our personhood is our task, right? Our
Hmm.
employment. That's why it's called the employees in some ways. But the objects have a kind of personhood that escapes category.
Hmm.
And so, in a way, is it about objecthood? Is it about personhood? Is it about metaphysics? Is it about phenomenology? Yes.
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of the characters. So we're getting these interviews. We don't later in the book you sort of piece together that whoever the sort of hierarchy is, the boss of the company, has sent this team to do these interviews, and you're just kind of getting the responses. And what comes out to me a lot of them is how many of the people they're interviewing, who you slowly piece together who they are, their reaction to these objects, and they have this sort of automatic or like sort of instinctual feeling of responsibility towards them, fascination towards them. Some of them feel guilt about the objects if they haven't treated the objects in certain ways. And one thing I was thinking about reading at this time was how much a lot of this is a sort of like almost like ideal, naive gallery experience, right? Where like they're just encountering this thing and they're immediately just sort of struck with these deep, intangible, weird relations that just sort of take them over. And the novel, I don't know if the novel in its entirety, but at least a big chunk of it was presented with this sculpture set. It's Leia Goldetta Hesteland. It was this exhibit called Consumed Future Spewed Up as Present. And I will say, like, if you look up the pictures, like I think they're extremely fun, these sculptures. They don't I don't think you need to, and I don't think they
You
take over the
definitely
book.
maybe wait
Yeah,
until after you've
yeah.
read the book because I
Hmm.
don't want you to presume, I don't want
Right.
readers to presume. One of the things the sculptor, the author, and the book all have in common is relying on Ursula Le Guin's idea of the carrier bag theory of fiction and
Mm,
fiction's work as holding conceptual things, right? But the sculptor also sees sculpture as doing that. And that is some of the work the objects in the book do. I would also add that this is a very queer book. The
mm,
objects have an effect on sexuality.
hmm,
One of them is nicknamed by the crew the reverse strap-on, which they
hmm,
hesitate to say because they're very almost asexual in many ways.
hmm,
But then there is this glimmer of sexuality that is connected to the objecthood that comes into the book. And people or humanoids who may or may not be considered people by the standards of their society because they're at least part machine or grown,
hmm.
um, come to realize they have sexuality from the objects, which is interesting as well. And I think Robin has self-consciously written a very queer book.
Hmm. There's a kind of a sensuality that's so intense that you can't help but read it as a certain kind of sexuality at points. Like there's this I love you talked about like privileging sight kind of last, and there's so much in this about the tactility of the objects, and things that are smooth, things that are rough. There are people who think that the objects are trying to communicate with them by smells.
One
Um,
of it talks about warmth as well.
mhm. And
But
there's
I mean, you were talking about the gallery experience. I mean, in a gallery experience, there's intent, right? There's
mhm,
curatorial intent, there's artistic intent, there's usually wall text or a catalog, right? But here there is no intent beyond objecthood. They're not made
mm,
any, there's no Aristotelian telos, right? Like
mhm.
they just are, right? As far as we know, and as far as the perspectives of the narrators go.
Yeah, it's one of the things I love about this is reading this as like a really interesting entry in contact fiction, right? And this idea of like to really encounter the alien other. And it's certainly not in the usual framework of them. But I mean, you can think about things like, maybe the monoliths from 2001 or something like that. But I was thinking about maybe like Stanislaw Lem's work,
Yeah,
particularly,
absolutely.
do you know Fiasco?
I don't. I mean, I do. At some point I read it, but it's been a
Yeah,
very long time
that
since I've gone back to Lem.
that's one of these people who they're trying to make contact with this planet and they know there's intelligent life there, but they just can't get them to respond. And it's all about this like just sort of like banging your head to the point they eventually kind of do violence just trying to get a response. And it ends kind of ambiguously and you don't really know what was actually there. But so much of that here is that this feeling that like I know something is there, but it's not of humans or for humans necessarily. And that kind of disjunct is such a big part of this. But there's
There's
also
an Angélica Gorodischer short story as well that's sort of about this whole society where they're sort of silent and appear to live in the ruins of their previous society. And
mm,
there's a dance-like aspect that's totally inscrutable to the contactors, but then one of them becomes one of the observed.
huh.
And there's this context in which, where does the borderline between observer and observed dissolve? And I think Le Guin also speaks to this in a lot of her anthropological fiction as well.
Yeah, totally. And I was really fascinated reading this time the way that these objects and the way that the crew of the ship are interacting with it, awakens something in them, right? Because like the plot of the book, such it is basically there's kind of a breakdown, maybe there's a mutiny.
There's definitely a death.
Hmm.
I mean, we are later able to glean that there's a death that is probably a murder
Right.
that occurs.
Yeah. But so much of that seems to be because these humanoids who presumably have been working fine up to this point are sort of being awoken into something more human or more than human or something different just by encountering these objects that they don't speak human language. They don't seem to have movement of their own, but it has such a stark impact on them that it kind of wakes something up. I just think that's
And
really
it wakes
rad.
up the humans too, right? Because they
Hmm.
seem to be talking about their memories of what appears to be a future Denmark.
Hmm.
And some of them, so the humanoids appear to have been created by a character that appears in the interview,
Yeah.
Dr. Lund.
Hmm.
And I mean, there's some discussion of their presence in far future Denmark, but there is a reason why everyone is on this spaceship, and it's unclear to me what the state of the Earth is or what the
Hmm.
relationship to Earth is, but none of these people they've agreed to serve out their lives in.
Yeah.
And when they see the objects, for some reason, their memories of home become hyperactivated.
Hmm.
And so while the humanoids are discovering their humanness, the humans seem to discover also more of their humanness. And it triggers general emotional reactions.
And this kind of nostalgia that's kind of like overpowering, it seems like, for some of them.
Yeah, and it's also that the objects are in an environment that superficially resembles a terrestrial planet like Earth. There's a
Hmm.
scene where they go out and it's snowing and they love the snow,
Oh
and then
yeah.
they take off their helmets and
It's like
it's
sulfuric or something. It's acidic. Yeah.
it's acidic. I think it's not as I think it's basic, but
Hmm.
yeah,
Oh yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
something. And it
Uh-huh.
like sears their faces, but nonetheless they are so touched by the snow because they've been having these intense memories of what they consider snow, right?
Hmm.
From an Earth perspective. And there seems to be this deep connection to a place that is not home that becomes to stand in for a homeness. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know, there's sort of a Heimlichkeit, right?
Sorry, say that again.
I guess the German there's kind of like a
Oh,
hominess.
yeah, uh-huh. Yeah,
Sorry, I
absolutely.
use the German word because we don't have a word for that.
Hmm.
But German, and I imagine Danish as well, has a way of you can just compound nouns
Hmm.
to make up concepts for things that so a lot more nouns in fact exist for concepts like hominess and I do wonder what I mean, I don't read Danish, what this book was like in the original, but
Mm.
the language is so incredibly lyrical as well.
Yeah.
And which is something I appreciated because often speculative fiction feels the need to take on a objective or scientific tone because it touches on matters of the sciences
Hmm.
or has a space related like component or whatever, but this at all, runs away from that. And
Yeah.
I really love that.
I love, and it's, I mean, it's such, I was going through and trying to decide like which sections I wanted to maybe like read, and it was too hard to decide. I could just read almost any passage here. They're so great. And something that I really love about it, and this is credit to both Ravin and Aitken, that it has this quality where a lot of the sequences and the lines are really, really striking and lovely, but it also has this kind of, I don't know, unconstructedness. I never doubt for a moment that this is just someone talking kind of off the cuff in an interview, which is such a hard thing to do, and
And
to do
yet the
well.
statements are like they skip numbers, right? They're
Yeah.
out of order. And you do wonder like, oh, what happened
Hmm.
here? And you can
There's
see,
redactions, right? There's like every once in a while there's
yeah.
something that's been cut out. Yeah.
And we're later informed, like sort of by the epilogue, that these are audio recordings being live transmitted. So that adds something to it.
Hmm.
And the descriptions of the parts of the ship as well are really evocative of bodies. They talk about
Hmm.
biodraperies, which we don't really
Hmm.
know what they do,
Right.
right?
Uh-huh.
And another thing I really loved about the book was the attention to textiles. Um,
Mm.
they talk about hide. And one of the more important employees of the ship, it turns out, is the person who does the laundry, and
Uh-huh.
which
Yeah.
they didn't initially realize was important, but then they realized like and she's a human, I
Hmm.
believe. She's the only person who is allowed by the hides to clean them. And
Yeah.
it's very specific. The objects are dictating who can clean
Hmm.
them, who can, right? And like why this culture that's a spacefaring sort of Danish culture has these precious hides
Uh-huh.
is a little interesting to me. And I think also one of the other things that it can translation and Robin's prose can be given credit for is how visceral some of the descriptions are. They talk about mouths, they talk about, but they're not
Yeah.
really talking about bodies, right?
Hmm.
It's almost able to be visceral without bodies.
Hmm. There's a recurring sensory image from a few different speakers of having something in your mouth, of like having like imagine like having a varnished wooden ball in your mouth, or like there's a crew member who's walking around with a marble behind their teeth, kind of clicking a little bit, and just that, yeah, just bringing that up when you're reading it, it's just immediately like right there in your mouth with you. I don't know, for me at least.
Well, the idea of wanting to touch art with your whole body, especially parts of it that it's not acceptable to, or to
Hmm.
perceive with parts of your body that we don't normally perceive with.
Hmm.
Like we don't normally go up to an object we don't understand and perceive it with our mouths.
Hmm.
Right?
Right.
But this book makes that very a plausible form of
Hmm.
otherness.
I
Um,
I've been hanging out with my nephew who is two and some change.
oh,
It's best, right?
I guess he does perceive things with his mouth.
Yeah, right.
Others do that. Yeah.
Hmm.
And
And
maybe this
it makes
book is
sense.
kind of curiosity that we do have as humans and sort of unlearn, right?
Hmm.
Oh, I just wanted to ask you, I thought this was sort of a really I couldn't think of another book that was structured through interviews this way. And I
Hmm.
was trying to, but I couldn't think of another title that uses the statement as
Yeah.
an advice this way
So
recently.
I know I was trying to think of something that this to this depth, and the one it's not a great comparison, but Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry for the Future, which he has said is his last novel. He's not done writing, but he's kind of done with the novel. Is so it has two big, I think it's mainly two big threads that are kind of traditional narrative, but then most chapters are these often sort of unframed just speeches, interviews. And he's talked a lot about he was really influenced by reading a lot of witness accounts, people who had survived natural disasters or been present in historic accounts, and being kind of, he is a storyteller, like being kind of entranced by the way that there is no like raw, unmediated reporting. That even if you take someone who's like not a storyteller and they survived, the Dust Bowl or the sinking of a ship or something like that, and you say, well, what was that like? Tell me about it. People immediately try to switch into this kind of mode where they're telling a story, right? And they're already doing this construction on it. And but it's also different than like a finished edited thing, right? And that's the quality here that I love so much is that you get these very different voices and they know they're being interviewed, right? They are employees. Like imagine like going to like getting called in for an official interview with like HR,
And
right?
they know that this is the situation.
Yeah. So they're not just talking completely freely. They are thinking about what they're saying. And it makes them more, there's a lot of talk about their dreams, their bodies, their doubts. And it makes that sort of more poignant in a way to like be thinking of it in that setting, that that's how intense these feelings are.
I mean, one of the ways in which this novel is foreign and not alien, for American readers is that this is a kind of very European, very Danish, German collective work culture, right?
Mm,
Everyone has, it does not feel like a workplace that we are accustomed to because we have these very individualistic neoliberal models of the worker, right?
hmm.
But this to me did very much feel like, oh, this might be the way a Scandinavian corporation actually does talk to its
Oh,
employees.
interesting.
And actually, the objects themselves, the spareness of the language is evocative of a lot of Danish furniture design
Mm-hmm.
sensibility. And so to me, some of the foreignness of this novel to us as readers might come from the fact that we don't actually work in an egalitarian workplace that
Mm-hmm.
has these sorts of interviews and these sorts of communities, but they do, in fact, exist in sort of proto form in Scandinavia. So
That's interesting. That makes sense.
my job before this was on a German postdoc, which is not totally different culturally. But the idea of a committee coming to interview you is, yeah, absolutely something you would have in a workplace. Whereas in an American workplace, that doesn't really happen in quite the same way. Like
Hmm.
you get to HR and it's like one person and they're really biased or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
It's sort of like we're doing this kind of humane, indifferent reporting kind of thing is way more something I associate with like an EU initiative or a German, like, oh, we're from, the Max Weber, Max Planck Investigative Committee. Like, I wouldn't have been surprised at all if I had an interview like that, right?
Okay.
So
Interesting.
I think that's something that Americans don't experience, and maybe we think, oh, like that's part of the futuristic culture of the book. But I think that's just part of workplace culture other
Huh.
places.
That's
Um,
fascinating. And I
and I
guess
think
it,
one of the things the book works really well at doing is make blending things that are absolutely mundane, absolutely quotidian with absolutely radical forms of otherness.
yeah.
And it's sometimes hard to tell which is which.
Hmm. I think that is a good time to take a quick break. All right, we are back because we were talking about the good stuff on the break, and I was saying that I really wanted to read something, but it's hard to decide what to pick out. And you mentioned the funeral director. Tell us about the funeral director.
So the funeral director is one of many employees on the 6,000 ship, but the interviews with this person are ominous in a way that the interviews with the other employees are not. And while it's often unclear what productivity means for the other employees, it's very clear what productivity means for the funeral director. And I was sort of struck by these moments in the book because it was one of those rare moments where you were like, oh wait,
Hmm.
something else, this is pivoting, right? And so these were often points of where actually the lyricism was toned down
Mm.
because there was this pivot point in the
Hmm.
narrative where you're like, oh no, something bad is happening.
Hmm.
Like that there was a almost an ominous turn in those passages.
Yeah,
And so
the funeral director is someone who would like to increase productivity, which is a little strange thing to say when you're on a ship and you run the incinerator, you know?
yeah, the funeral director would like to be using his equipment more.
Yeah, it's like,
It was gendered he him and
uh-huh.
really wanted to be putting that to use. Likes the smell.
I want to read this one section just because I have like 100 underlined. Which statement is this? This is statement 62. The interviewee is talking about how they missed this person, Cadet '04, who has left the ship.
Yes, we
Uh,
don't really know. There's the third mate Jeppa and
hmm
Cadet 04 that we keep hearing about,
hmm
but
So this person being interviewed, they're talking about one of the objects, and they say, the pattern on the object's surface looks like ink that's been smudged while it was still wet. The stone is sandy in color, with black veins that peter out, like wet print in a newspaper someone left in the rain. How can I describe it? Have you seen it? It looks like someone wrote on the stone while it was still in creation, but then after it came into being, when gradually it hardened and set, the words were obliterated in the process, becoming a pattern instead in the shiny stone, a shadow language. I too am marked by now obliterated words I should have said, whose meaning I no longer recognize. My face bears the obliterated words that were meant so that Cadet '04 would know me and know my voice. And that's just this kind of this thing that's just offered up, right, from one of these humanoids. And I think, we should talk maybe about what the
Talk about the
humanoids
humans and the
are.
humanoids.
Yeah.
So they talk about first of all the rock passage. As someone who picks up rocks just
Mm,
randomly because they're good rocks and keeps
mm-hmm,
them, absolutely resonated with me. I don't know how many listeners also are like, this is a good rock. This is a
mm-hmm.
good stuff. But this does happen to me. But
This is a book for people who like good rocks.
and good
Absolutely.
picks or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you're one of those people who goes on walks, which is harder in New York City still, but
Mm-hmm.
goes on walks and is like, this is a great rock, then this is a book for you.
Mm-hmm.
But the humans and the humanoids. So the humanoids seem to be some sort of biologically grown, but mechanistically programmed
Mm-hmm.
cyborg type creatures. And they're produced initially by a man named Dr. Lund in Denmark, who sounds a little bit Dr. Frankensteinish. He
Mm-hmm.
has like very personal connections. They grow inside pods,
Mm-hmm.
which have humans speak to as they inject oxytocin into them to
Mm-hmm.
induce like a kind of attachment response. And it's
Mm-hmm.
very clear some of the humans and humanoids on the ships do love each other, even if the
Yeah.
word love is something they come to realize or quite not. But the humanoids, some of them they're not given sexual organs by default, but some of them
Mm-hmm.
seem to have an attachment,
Mm-hmm.
which seems to be some sort of sexual organ. I couldn't really tell.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this constantly tense relationship, right? Because it's a class divide in their workplace. But at the same time, some of them seem to form genuine friendships and
Mm-hmm.
understandings of their own humanness. And there are humans on the ship that clearly are telling, the anonymous committee members, like, no, our colleagues are becoming more human because of this. Don't cut this off.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other ones who are freaked out by what they appear to be the subhuman class's realization of its own humanity, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this could all be a class allegory in some ways, but in other ways, it's about, at what point is a thing a human?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's one of the interviews where one of the humanoids asks, if you just decide to call me human, does that make me human?
Yeah. Is it just a name thing? There's
And
a
as my cat is sitting here purring, lying like directly in front of the laptop, like a rare hide, I have to wonder about the spectrums of non-human experience
mm-hmm.
in this book and how it sort of validates those as important and equally important to the human lived experience, the
Mm-hmm.
experience of the objects, the experience, and the objects have a not a personhood per se, but like an objecthood that is in and of itself worthy of recognition, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think this book makes a really broad humanistic argument for the non-human.
Yeah. There's a human interviewed who is talking about meeting, I think, some of the early humanoids, and says, are we supposed to love them? And if so, are we supposed to love them as humans or like dogs? Right? And like
And then
tr
there's one with red hair where they give her freckles. And like, why
yeah.
give her freckles if we're not supposed to fall in love with her, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why make them look so much like us? Make them, and it's like, were they done that way to make the crew comfortable? And there's some allegation that they were banned in Denmark or not allowed to be free
Mm.
in Denmark itself because there's a small anecdote about a house where someone lets them in the house
Oh yeah, that's right.
and then it's not technically legal. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if they're on the space colony kind of mission because something happened right back in
Mm-hmm.
Earth history. And
Well,
there
that
is another interview about the vision of a child's humanoid with the blood of a chicken on its hands, but that
mm-hmm.
has never happened
Mm-hmm.
yet.
So there's a really strong thread in this book that I don't know if it's drawing on, but it definitely resonates with, rhymes with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and or Blade Runner, the adaptation, that this fascination with these, artificial, quote unquote, artificial humans who are maybe stronger than us, maybe smarter than us, maybe can outlive us, right? The humanoids here are at least potentially immortal, right? Because they can kind of be backed up and regenerated.
Although they do have memory loss, as is
Yeah.
mentioned many, many times, they wonder if they'll lose the memory of this or if it'll
Mm-hmm.
be intentionally stripped from them because
Mm-hmm.
they don't have control,
There's
right?
there's that astonishing section where one of the humanoids is saying like, I kind of don't want to talk anymore. I don't want to be like a thinking being anymore. And then mid-interview it just cuts off, like mid-sentence. Like it's
Yeah,
it's
like it's like they were like fine and flipped a switch.
yeah.
And there's also one where they express like they would like to have a committee about when they get
Mm,
reprogrammed. They would like to
mm-hmm.
have input into that decision. And I mean, certainly that seems fair. They have agency and personhood
Hmm.
to be, right? And so it's a question, well, in their society, what exactly happened that made them, I mean, they're the Cylons from Battlestar Galactica in
Right.
certain
Yep.
ways as well,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I'm sure Raven thought about all of this, but also
Hmm.
like about deep divisions between natural and artificial that go into the history of science
Hmm.
and the Wunderkammer in art, right? Because these objects, are they natural? Are they artificial? How do they help us distinguish between the categories of ars and natura, right?
Hmm.
And the objects, in a way, blur those categories rather than enforce those distinctions.
Yeah, absolutely. That idea of memory too, and like how much of this is about, because right, you're reading this thing that has been sort of like designed as a record, right?
And the committee is disintegrated, presumably.
Right. Yeah.
And they're supposed, this is an extreme spoiler, so
Right.
stop now.
Yeah.
But the committee is supposed to be humanoids that the ship doesn't realize that are
Hmm.
humanoids, the latest generations, until the very end when the disintegrating mechanism is sent, the biomechanism,
Hmm.
and they disintegrate almost immediately, whereas the older models, who are presumably less biological, seem
Hmm.
to live, right?
Hmm.
And they leave a recording actually, which is really poignant about how they're
Yeah.
going to walk onto the surface of the world to die.
Yep.
And like that seems like the most human thing you could do in that moment.
Hmm. There's this line from that very last segment where whichever humanoid has like come back from the planet, like into the ship to kind of like leave this audio recording for the last time and then go back to the planet. And they say, how can we live with the knowledge that none of these days will be remembered by anyone, not even ourselves?
In
And I
a
mean, that's
weird
all of
way.
us. Yeah, right.
I
That's
mean,
like
because
this
we as
human.
the reader are the memory, but
Hmm.
the character doesn't have the agency of knowing, I mean, in their universe, whether the report will be printed,
Hmm.
used, right? But also they don't know their characters in a novel,
Right.
right? And so
Hmm.
that does place the reader in this unique position of, is the reader the memory? Like, do
Hmm.
we serve, what is our relation to the objects? What is our relationships to the humans and the humanoids? Like, do we intrinsically somehow identify with the humans? Because I didn't, right?
Hmm. Right.
And the book is set up not to do that. Like
Hmm.
the book is set up to make that distinction between them ambiguous and to have you slowly realize how their society functions rather than to set you up as human and then introduce the humanoids.
Hmm.
I think that was really structurally clever because
Yeah.
it raised the question of agency and self and personhood legally and in the workplace without having to do so much overt work. It was very subtle.
Yeah.
The
And it's
subtlety of the book is just
oh,
amazing.
it's so good. And the extent to which something I love about any work, particularly speculative work that doesn't lay out how its speculative world works, just like right off the bat, is that it requires you as a reader to do a certain amount of work. This book is so good at dropping these slight little hints because you're in this, kind of unusual format of these interviews, and you start picking out that, oh, there's humans, oh, there's humanoids. And it's not until a third or halfway through the book that you get like a clear, oh, okay, there's two kinds of beings here, right? Because you don't know when people are talking to you, which they are. It's not something that's immediately obvious.
There's this frequent critique of science fiction that like the first paragraph is always like Ganoth picked up the Tarl
Yeah.
sword of Neural and like you don't know any of
Uh-huh.
the words or the terms and then of course they're very grotesquely kind of quickly explained but this book is
Hmm.
the opposite of that stereotype
Hmm.
and maybe that is part of the reason why it got shut out from genre
Hmm.
awards and genre recognition because it refuses to conform to those stereotypes of
Hmm.
science fiction as a genre and I mean, I think that actually that's what makes it succeed and
Hmm.
as a work of literature. And I
Hmm.
think it will long outlast many of its other publications in that International Booker Year as a work
Hmm.
of literature. It was the most unique thing that I've read in years.
Hmm. It's
I
it's
remember the first time I read it, just being absolutely blown away by how singularly, like it was a unicum of a book,
hmm
which is so rare as a
yeah.
reviewer. I was supposed to review it. I got really sick and I didn't. And it was one
Yeah.
of the great regrets of
Mm,
my reviewing career that I didn't get to be like, this is a masterpiece.
yeah.
And because it is, I think, a modern masterpiece. And I think it's one of those books like The Left Hand of Darkness where it won't get recognized at the time, right?
Mm,
But 40 or 50 years from now, we're going to be talking about Olga Ravitsy and
hmm
plays as an inflection point for a new wave of literary speculative fiction, and because a lot of it is coming from translation, we've got stuff from Basque, we've got stuff from, more Danish, Swedish, Norwegian.
hmm
We've got, I mean, I think more of it is happening actually outside the US
mm,
as well, where
hmm
genre cultures aren't quite so entrenched.
yeah.
And also where there's a long tradition, a Borgesian tradition, right? An
Hmm.
Calvino-esque tradition of writing speculative fiction as literature.
Hmm. No, absolutely. The the one of the many virtues of this book is that balance of most of the things they talk about are kind of mundane and like very easily accessible, the things you're talking about. And then when there are these strange things that aren't explained, the biodraperies, the add-on, which is like is maybe like a hologram thing, maybe like a physical
I feel
prosthetic.
like it's a physical prosthesis, but I'm
Yeah.
not entirely sure, and that's
Yeah.
fine.
But it's such a nice balance of having all this like very, very sensory driven images that you can really easily call up in your mind, and then these things that you can never call up in your mind except out of pure imagination, right? Because it's not spelled out. Yeah, it's such a nice balance, and it's also like something I was thinking about this a lot, like kind of qua science fiction, is that I mean this is probably technically a novella, right? If it came out for like a from a normal U.S. press, I think they might call it that by word count.
I mean,
Um,
it's about 50,000 words, maybe, right?
Yeah, something like that. And it's I feel like it's really good at not I don't know how to say this. It's not trying to do more than it's doing, and it just nails that. And that's
If
part of
it
why it
were
feels kind
longer,
of
it wouldn't succeed. It's one of
mm-hmm,
those things that is exactly the right length for its form.
mm-hmm,
And I think Robin's later, my work is longer. And also, I mean, she writes publicly about feminist ideas, about art, about ideas of objecthood, right? She's a thinker
mm-hmm.
in many media. And I think this book is a really interesting encapsulation I mean, people wouldn't superficially be like, oh, this is also a feminist novel in the way
Mm,
that my work is a feminist novel because it's about childbirth and about labor but this is about, I think, many of those issues just through
yeah,
an incredibly different lens. And,
absolutely.
and I hope that people see this like they see Le Guin's work now, right? But
Mm-hmm,
not during her lifetime, as
mm,
this kind of trail of thinking through otherness, thinking through gender, thinking through position in society, thinking through material, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think Robin is a really brilliant writer, and I hope she also speaks English quite well. She gives interviews, whatever. But I also hope we get more of her work in translation soon because my work was good, but I desperately want her to write more
Yeah.
speculative fiction because I'm selfish, and
Mm-hmm,
there are many, many books now coming out about the sort of alienated experience of visceral motherhood, and many of
mm-hmm,
them are quite good
mm-hmm,
and really valuable contributions to the feminist discourse.
mm-hmm.
But there was no other book like The Employees.
Yeah.
And it stood alone the year it was
Mm-hmm,
published. And a book as weird as this
mm-hmm.
deserves, I hope that she goes back to speculative fiction.
Yeah. I mean, within speculative fiction and like science fiction, contact fiction is one of my absolute favorite. I don't know, something about that I really, really dig. Just thinking about the engagement with the radically alien other. I just find something about that so fascinating. And this is one of like the best, weirdest ones I've encountered in a long time. Like there have been good ones. I don't want to like say there haven't been any great ones. I was thinking about E. Catherine Tobler's what's that novella called? The Necessity of Stars,
Yes.
which is a very weird contact story that's really, really good. But this really stands out for me in terms
Well,
of
I mean,
how
it's
well it
not
works.
about language because often contact fiction is about the nature of
Yeah,
language, right? And the
right.
nature of communication. And this is not
Hmm.
at all, this is so it supersedes language, right?
Yeah.
And I really, I mean, yes, it's about language on some level, but
Hmm.
not the way that contract fiction usually is on like quite a
Yeah.
super level.
And
And
I think that's part of the reason that Lem was in my head for a lot of this too, right? Where, even in something like Solaris, where like you are quote unquote talking to these things, but it's not about language. It's about this much deeper strangeness and trying to bridge that gap.
like Lem's really early use of the word robot, right? This is one of the books that uses concepts before their time, I think.
Mm,
And perhaps in 20 years, we'll come back to this and say, oh wow,
hmm.
this was because it often seems to me that biological hybrid technology is where this stuff is going, and
Hmm.
this book definitely leans into that.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know exactly how the ship is supposed to work, and I don't think we're supposed to know, but the idea that it's at least itself an organism in part is fascinating to me.
Hmm. We're getting towards the end here. Is there any last thoughts about the employees that we want to make sure we hit?
Just superficially from this discussion, if you haven't read the book, it might
Yeah.
sound sort of schizophrenic, but it is actually incredibly coherent. It's
Hmm.
really short.
Hmm.
Um, you can read it in an afternoon, but I also think it's really important. And then I think anyone who cares about either feminist theory, objecthood, object theory, sculpture, but also cool spaceships, aliens, contact stories.
Yep.
And even if you're not the type of person who reads speculative fiction, which you probably are if you're listening to this podcast,
Yeah.
this is the kind of book that I would force feed someone who didn't know how good speculative fiction was. So I urge listeners to actually just read the book. Often, people to say, "Oh, decide for yourself" or whatever. No, just read the book. Read the book. It's worth your time. The prose is excellent. And I really look forward to seeing what Ravin does, both conceptually and in broader senses and interviews and on her other kinds of work, but also with this. And I think she's also interested in theater. And I would love to see what
Oh,
maybe speculative fiction in theatrical form looks like from her. Because
interesting.
my work has a character, the husband in my work is a theater producer, but I
Okay.
think she herself is actually involved in theater. And
Okay.
yeah, I've never met her. She's on Twitter, but she seems like a fascinating person, and I would
Mhm.
love to see her in. We have these tiresome profiles, right, in U.S. media of, it girl woman writers, right? And they
Mhm.
use the phrase it girl, which is incredibly annoying and demeaning. Um,
Yeah.
but I would love to see a profile of someone like Olga Ravin because I want to know more about her background and
Mhm.
drove her to write this. And this, I mean, you can get this in Danish and just easily machine translate it, but I feel like she deserves more recognition in the Anglosphere as a major kind of thinker as
Mhm.
well as a writer.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Before we go, what else? Where can people find you? What do you want to share? What do you want to remind people to check out about your own work?
Well, obviously, my first book, We the Parasites, is from Sublunary Editions in the US and Boiler House in the UK. You can find it at almost any independent bookshop. I know everywhere from McNally Jackson to Unnameable to every place in New York stocks it, and you can get it online at Bookshop or Amazon or whatever it is that you choose to patronize. Although, if you order it directly from Sublunar Asterism, not only is it cheaper, but it supports the independent press more directly. So I'd encourage you to do that. Actually, with all independent press titles, ordering directly from a press
Mm-hmm.
rather than going through a distributor is a better way to support that press. And that
Mm-hmm.
includes Lolly, the publisher of this book in the original English translation and New Direction. So make sure that if you buy this book, try to buy it actually from the press because sometimes that means that they get bigger percentage of the money and actually more than goes to the author.
Yeah.
In terms of finding me, I'm on Twitter way too often. My username was from a failed experimental poetry project I never did in like 2009 and then never touched Twitter until like 2018. But it is Saint Softness, all one word. I post many pictures of the cat, but also lots of art and other things, literary things. And I should have more freelance work out this fall.
Cool.
And by the time this podcast airs, you will probably have seen an announcement from me about my forthcoming book. So I will just leave readers with that, and I really hope that you enjoy The Employees as much as I have.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and turn us off.
All right, thanks so much.
The Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism, with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Bartra Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabriel Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is rad. A few different ways you can do that. Subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/ancillary-review. That would be super cool of you. We really want to get Ancillary to a point where we can pay our contributors. You can also check out our show notes for bookshop links. If you buy a book through there, we get a cut. Finally, it's bizarrely hard to get the word out that we exist, so you know the drill. Click like, click share, leave a comment or review wherever you find us. Tell someone you know to check us out. It really helps. Questions, suggestions, pedantic notes about things we got wrong? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com. Next time, Dan Hartland is back to talk about magic and historicism in Jeanette Winterson's The Passion, no relation to the Gibson flick. Thanks for listening. Hope you're getting your summer reading done.
Cat has arrived. So if you guys start hearing cat related noises, It's not an ominous turn. It's just my
Yes.
cat.
Welcome to the podcast.